Hi, everyone. Hi. Welcome. Long time no see, everyone. Thanks for joining. All right. Let's welcome my panelists here. Welcome back, Briona. Please welcome Dean Jophiel and Tanya Cook as well. You guys can come on screen if you can. There we go. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm gonna let you guys give yourselves like a brief, tiny little introduction. I'm gonna kick it over to Bree first, even though everyone just met you. Let's do it all over again.
You do this every time. I was like, Maddie's not going to start with me this time. It's going to be someone else, and it's always me. Hi, I'm Bree. Pronouns are she, her. I am a Black queer woman living in Connecticut. Just moved back home after living in Austin, Texas for 8 years. My background is in nonprofit work. I currently work at a community theater as the director of development, and I have served on the board of Random Acts for 3 years.
Awesome. Tanya, hi.
Hello, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Tanya Cook. I am normally in my day job a professor of sociology. I use she, they pronouns. I am non-binary and queer. What else? I write with Kayla Joseph, and thank you for having us, Maddie, as a part of this. It's just wonderful to be here. Also, I'm going to ask y'all for a little bit of grace because I'm running on coffee and I have just finished COVID round 2. So, yay.
We are so grateful for you being here anyways. Dean, hi.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Dean Jophiel. I use he or any pronouns, whatever kind of floats your boat. I am a student. I go to community college. I'm currently pursuing degrees in social justice studies and also culture and communications. Let's see, I never know what to say about myself, but I work at my college's social justice center. I'll be moving to our Pride Center that we fought to kind of get opened on campus. I love dogs. I have a dog. You may hear her bark. Ideally, she won't. She's napping right now. But she has a tendency to know when a Zoom meeting is happening and yap just at that time. Yeah, and then I have a little bit of history in depolarization work, that kind of thing, that I'll have a little bit of more chance to talk about later. But thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here and as well as kind of like engage in this discussion with really awesome people. So yeah.
Awesome. We are very excited to have you. So I want to start by kind of defining depolarization. I know it's a very broad kind of term that we're talking about here, but specifically depolarization is about easing divisions and reducing hostility between opposing groups or viewpoints. And the reason why this is super crucial today, and especially, we see this a lot on the internet, but extreme polarization will lead to kind of this gridlock conflict and overall breakdowns in communication. And so by finding common ground and fostering that understanding, even with people that we may disagree with, we can create stronger communities and work together more effectively. So my first question for you guys is kind of just what, similar to what I just asked Bree in the opening question of this last panel, but what does depolarization mean to you? And I'm going to start this time not with Bree, but with Dean.
Yeah, so for me, depolarization is most of all a shift in my mindset. I think that I have to intentionally step into conversations with that in mind because it's not our default setting. Especially online, we log on and a lot of the time it feels like you're a different person. It's easier to be meaner, unkind, rude, whatever, and even to be overly familiar with people that you don't know. And so depolarization, if somebody comes into my DMs, replies to me in a way that it's like, you have entirely missed my point. You've either done this intentionally to piss me off or are that ignorant. And for me, depolarization is largely just doing my best to think the best of other people and assume that that's not their intention, and then engage in dialogue. And even if that is their intention, I'm still engaging in that dialogue because it sort of revolves around a willingness to go, wow, I don't agree with what you're saying, or I don't think that you're going about this in the right way. I am going to emulate kind of this golden rule, treat others the way you wish to be treated, and engage in conversation with you without necessarily the goal of like proving that I'm right and you're wrong, but just to have open conversation and open dialogue about whatever the topic is. And sometimes it's a really minor fandom thing, but a lot of the other times it's about kind of this very polarized political world that we live in.
Yeah, awesome. Love that answer. Tanya?
Well, thank you. I'm just so excited that Dean is a student. I'm just gonna think about that for a minute. But also I would say it's going back to a lot of what Briona said in the panel previously, which is what is my goal in the conversation and letting my emotions exist, but kind of a little bit of compartmentalization around that and going, this is the coping strategy I'm going to use here as a person and let go of what is my emotional engagement in this conversation and just try to of course be heard but also recognize my own privilege and or vulnerability in that space and say you do get to have my attention, but there's a limit to this, right? There's a limit to what I will give to you. And like I love that you mentioned the golden rule. I heard years ago in a training about the platinum rule, which is if you know the platinum, it's a little better than gold. And I forget who to credit for this, but the idea is treat people not how you want to be treated, but how they want to be treated. So sometimes we can kind of show up to a space and have this in mind and think about what grace do I want to give this person, but I also still have to have that protective layer of when do I want to enact a boundary for myself. So I think the platinum rule and kind of thinking about letting go of goals that I might have, like if I let go of wanting to win an argument, that helps me to engage in a more honest way with that person.
Awesome. Bree?
I mean, how do you follow two fantastic answers? I echoing everything they just said, I think it's also the thing that's coming up for me is like the intention versus impact of like I can want to be here and create a space and keep myself safe and have respect for both myself and this person. But if my intention is to have a healthy conversation, even if it is one of like we are on the same side, right? Even if it is, you know, one that we're never going to agree. But if it gets to a point where like I feel unsafe or I feel like this isn't going anywhere, like we were talking about in the last panel, of like, you have every right to walk away. And I loved the idea, like Dean was saying at the beginning, of like, no one wakes up. I don't think anyone wakes up wanting to be terrible. It just kind of happens. And so I think I always also try to give that level of grace. But then also like, but I don't have to buy tickets to the circus, right? Like I can walk away and not participate in this. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it of like, I can de-escalate and have this conversation in a way that is always going to be, you know, one of safety and respect. But I also can just be like, yeah, no, I'm done. Like the blocked and blessed is always my favorite when I'm online. I'm like, I'm good. Like I don't have to do this. And I think that is such a powerful thing to be able to do as well.
Yeah. Awesome. I think my next question is going to be for all of you as well. How has empathy played a role in your work when engaging with people who hold opposing views? And I'm going to toss it over to Dean first.
Ooh, so this is a really good one, especially when I think about how I grew up. So my mother is one of the most just genius, spectacular, wonderful people you will ever meet in your entire life. And she does educational research, and I was homeschooled by her. And so I learned kind of a very good concept of what the consequences of my actions are from a very young age. That was kind of hammered into our curriculum and also just like my life and understanding you can do whatever you want forever if you take accountability and you understand the consequences of your actions. And so that is important to me. But in the way that that relates to empathy, is I've recognized a lot of my own ignorance as of late. I don't like to view myself as an ignorant person. It makes me feel bad. It makes me feel lesser than. But I've tried to kind of step away from that and recognize, yeah, I'm ignorant about a lot of stuff. I'm taking an Asian American history course for the first time in my life. And when I was kind of going through my class schedule, signing up for things, I'm like, I don't want to take Black history because I'm a Black man and I know some stuff already. And I'm like, I know nothing about Asian American history, and I really, really should. And this is a chance for me to learn that. And so I took the class and I've learned so much, and it's one of the best classes that I've taken. Um, but with that came being like, I don't know what this is. I could not have told you why there are two Koreas. I don't know how that division happened. I don't. And you feel smaller if you don't know the answers to things. And I think a lot of the time, in spaces where we know that we're right, or we believe that kind of we have a more ethical opinion than another person, it's really easy to be like, well, you're ignorant and wrong, and I know I'm right. And even if they are ignorant and wrong, you have to be able to recognize that ignorance. And so I have a lot of empathy toward wanting to stay ignorant, wanting to not learn things because they're hard. There is a massive amount of work that goes into the paradigm shift in your brain from however you're living now to recognizing all of the different kind of struggles in the world and all of the different disparities and things that people experience in a way that is different than you. And it is so much easier to just exist in your own little bubble than to actively work every single day to learn and change and do new things. And so for me, in depolarizing the conversation, understanding that ignorance, that's kind of where empathy comes through to me, where it's like, yeah, this is hard. You might not want to do that. And also, I might be talking a little bit too much here, but I think that a lot of the time people have a very similar viewpoint as us, just in a different way. A lot of the time, oh, we want to protect the kids. We want to do this. We want to do that. I want to protect the kids too. I want to protect trans kids, that kind of thing. And they just understand things in a different way than you do. And you can have empathy and grace toward engaging in conversation. Like, yeah, we all want to look after our kids. We all want them to get what we think is kind of the right education, that kind of thing. It's just a matter of what that functionally looks like that requires such a big shift.
Yeah, it's an amazing answer. Bree?
I needed to mute myself because I was doing my therapist, like agreeing, like, yes, like just the really happy I was on mute. Yeah, every single thing that Dean just said times a bajillion. And then I also think of empathy as like we are on the same coin, just on different sides. Of like we are having the same or similar human experiences, but just in different viewpoints. Um, and like Dean was saying, the first thing came to mind is like I think about, for me, it's always like, as of right now, it's like abortion access, right? Of like, you can 1,000,000,000% uh, have whatever view you want to have about abortions, right? You can truly believe that a woman has a right to her own body, but we can think about it in two very different ways. I can view it as I just think women should have access. Anyone who can get pregnant should have access to healthcare that they feel is beneficial for them. And you can feel the same way, but it could be a completely different viewpoint, right? Like it's just always like Dean was saying, like when I think of empathy, I'm like, I have to think of this person, whatever they're thinking about is just as close and personal to them as the viewpoints that I have. And I don't have to understand it. I don't have to agree with it. But when I think of empathy, I think of respect and I think of patience and I think of grace. So, like, we are always learning and changing and growing. And you can believe one thing today, and then tomorrow you can completely shift that view by having one conversation with the person who just listened to you. Like, the impact of like someone who can come to me and be pro-life and I can be like, right, but when you talk about pro-life, what do you mean? Because I think of X, Y, and Z, and just giving, like I said, the other, like the last panel, my perspective. I'm not here to persuade you. I'm just here to give you a different viewpoint. And so that's what I think about with empathy is like it is holding space for the person and how they feel so deeply affected by whatever their beliefs are. And knowing that, like, I don't have to understand or agree, but I can respect it. And I think that just goes back to like taking space and taking account and just remembering that, like, we are all humans having this singular experience for the first time. And that is okay to not know the answers and to give grace and give space and be respectful, but in a way that still keeps everybody safe.
Yeah, love that. I'm holding space for that answer. I had to. Tanya.
Okay, I don't know how to follow this. You all saw Loki make a little appearance, my cat. But I will say your comments made me think about I approach perhaps because of my long tenure in academia and then being a teacher, I approach every interaction as what is this going to teach me when I'm in listening to the angels of my better nature, if you will. And sometimes what that can teach you is patience. So for me, empathy comes from a place of trying to have patience for the conversation and trying to think about what can I learn either about this person, about this viewpoint, or about myself through this interaction. And sometimes it is just, why is this upsetting me so much? Why do I have all these feelings I have to deal with? And how do I deal with them? Sometimes that's what I get out of an interaction. Like, this is bringing something up. What's underneath that? So I think as a person who is continually looking to prioritize the journey and think about what can I learn from this? How can I integrate this and become a better teacher, mother, person, whatever is important to me. So for me, holding empathy for someone is often about that, like whether or not they're going to say something that I haven't considered before, or whether or not it's about they're going to bring up emotions for me that I need to then consider how to process in a healthy way. I think there's something to learn out of every interaction.
Agreed, definitely. Next question, what strategies have you found effective for maintaining respect and curiosity in those kind of polarized conversations? And I will start with Tanya this time.
Well, thank you. This is the one I actually wrote notes down, and I'm a notes person. So if you see me doing this, that's what's going on for me. I'm going to come to this from my positionality as a teacher. So often I do teach at a community college, and you will have folks. The glorious thing, as I'm sure Dean knows, and some of you know about a community college, is you will have folks who very much are coming from different perspectives in your classroom. They may be immigrants. They may have a very strong religious or ethnic influence. They may be older, they may be younger, they may be veterans. You get it. And I love that, because what I do not have to spend a lot of time teaching is compassion and sociological imagination. So one thing that is great in that space is usually folks are pretty good at taking on others' perspectives. So I come to these interactions from a place of, we're going to set the norms, we're going to set the boundaries. We agree on these as a class. Just as we agreed when we signed up for this webinar, we're going to do XYZ things. And then from there, I just come from a place of curious. Okay, well, why do you think that? In a way that's not threatening, explain to me where this position is coming from. Well, that's what I believe. Okay, if that's what you believe, what's under this? What are we afraid of? What are we getting? What are we holding on to here? That is something I can work on. And I will say, interestingly, this last semester, of course, there was the election, which was super fun for teachers to try to have space for, frankly. And the day after, I knew this was going to be a difficult day for everybody. And the day after, I brought in, my bag of tricks, which for me is snacks and Play-Doh, and showing a movie that is educational. And I'm talking about adults, and you should see people light up around Play-Doh, by the way. Little tip for you: bring fun things that kids haven't or people haven't looked at in 20 years. So holding space was a challenge, but I had students who were very diametrically opposed. I had a student who was quite conservative. I had a student who was quite liberal. And it was interesting to be the person who had to facilitate the space for them to talk to each other and collaborate. So I think the more you can try to create an opportunity for people to get beyond the personal and get into, let's work on this together. We have to intentionally solve this problem together, whether it's Play-Doh, whether it's actually talking about the issue of the day, bringing in politics, and then just kind of understanding, like, I don't know why you think this way, but I can hold space for you because you are abiding by the norms that we have agreed to as a community, and you're not being insulting or dangerous to me as an individual. That's where my personal line is. So for me, it's all about coming into that with kind of this radical acceptance of, this is the situation, this is where you are, this is where I am, and this is how I will try to set the ground rules so that we can talk to one another instead of past one another.
Yeah, love that. Dean?
Perfect. I'm so glad that I get to like immediately respond to you from community college professor to community college student. It's like, yes, exactly. That's what you're doing is what my favorite professors do. And I think as a student, one of the most difficult things about strategizing for me is that I'm also independent and also kind of combined with my depolarization work, I'm also an organizer and an activist. And to me, those are synonymous, but also I take two very different attitudes at times when interacting with those things. As an example, my campus recently, a group of students have organized a Turning Point USA collective club on campus. And for those of you who are not familiar, they are radical conservatives who notably dox educators, whatever, pose a genuine threat on campus. And while I'm open to kind of discussing viewpoints, whatever, things that are a safety hazard to students and educators on our campus is something that's not okay to me. And that's one of those lines that gets drawn where it's like, we don't get to have open dialogue about this because of the history of your organization and because of your goals that you are already setting out to do. And it is more important for me to protect my community than to, in this moment, reason with you, etc. So the last few weeks of this semester have been kind of a little bit of a scramble with the folks that I'm working with and etc. to be like, okay, are they meeting all club guidelines because they're using our official campus logo in their little logo? Do they have an advisor on campus, whatever, etc. If an advisor is present, we have people who've been sitting in on their meetings and it's like, oh, notably discriminatory things are being said, whatever. If they do not have an advisor, they need one in order to function. And if they do have an advisor, that advisor is tolerating this discriminatory and bigoted behavior on campus. And so sometimes you do need to take action. And I think a lot of the time when people think about depolarization, they're like, oh, I could never do any of that. I'm too opinionated, right? I can't reason with those people. I can't talk to those people. And I feel like we lose a lot of access there when there's kind of that assumption. I don't engage in depolarizing conversations all of the time. And additionally, sometimes depolarizing conversations are standing on business because you're interacting with a force that is so polarizing that that's kind of the best thing that you can do. But I think one thing that's helped me when people are like, oh, I don't really do that must be so difficult. I can't do a depolarizing thing. I'm like, yeah, how was your Thanksgiving? And they're like, oh, this one uncle, he this, that, this, that. But you sat and had conversation with him, right? You talked to your uncle who you don't agree with, who doesn't agree with you, who probably pissed you off the entire time, whatever, that kind of thing. Um, that in its own way can be a depolarizing conversation. Interacting with people that you already know, family members, friends, um, friends of friends who you kind of don't vibe with, whatever that might look like, or it might be interacting with a stranger. And even while I'm working kind of with my folks to establish that, hey, this club can't run for this, and this reason, I'm also interacting in a very mindful way. My goal is not to be, oh, I'm a leftist and you can't do this because this and that. And your goals or your beliefs are not things that I believe in, therefore you can't function. Instead, it's a shift toward what's what does safety actually look like for people on our campus, and how can I participate in that, protect my community, unite with my community, understanding that also the kids in this Turning Point Club, and I said kids, we're all adults of various ages and various groups, but I have to acknowledge that they are part of this community as well on campus. And while they're not part of my social justice center community, they might still pop in. I don't know. They've dropped off flyers for us, which um, is kind of done intentionally to upset us because they know what they stand for and they know what our center revolves around. But I have to acknowledge that they're part of our community as well, and that even with shutting down the club's intention to harm does not shut down the individual members existing within our community. Um, and so a lot of that strategizing can be around like, how do I deal with difficult situations in my community and understanding that the people in my community are not always people that I get along with, that I'm like this with. Um, because I think too often we think that our communities have to be people that we agree with on everything and we have to get along perfectly. And if somebody disagrees with another person, one of those people has to be wrong and removed. And a lot of depolarization to me is breaking down that boundary and understanding, no, we do kind of have to coexist and be in community with a variety of people. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I'm going to be honest, I forgot the question because I've just been listening the whole time. So I'm going to need you to run it back because I have also almost cried listening to both of them talk. So we need
What
run.
strategies have you found effective for maintaining that respect and curiosity in those polarized conversations?
Mhm. Yeah, what came up for me as Dean was talking is I have an uncle who we voted differently in this last election. And this is probably my most recent experience. We were in a family group chat and he sent it to us, and there's a clear political difference in our family. Um, but he sent the text and how, he has since, the election, he has lost friends, people have stopped talking to him because of how he voted. And he was just hopeful that our family wouldn't do the same. And everyone in my family was like, yeah, we love you, like niceties. Me, I was like, I'm going to come from a place of positivity first. I am happy that you use your voice to cast a vote. That is where I can start today. I go, but I also then want to follow up with like if you want to have a one-on-one conversation of like you and I are not politically aligned the same way, and we can be people who love each other and disagree, but I just need you to hear my perspective of like for the next 4 years, I will feel unsafe. So while you feel unsafe right now in this moment because you were able to share whatever feelings you had, which is fine, I go, you now have to know that when you voted against me and my communities, and I am going to hold you accountable for that. And what does that look like in our relationship moving forward? I'm not saying I don't want to have a relationship with you. I am saying that if we are going to be in a relationship together, I need you to know how this is going to affect me and how we're going to move forward. And so like that was my depolarizing conversation recently of like, it is not my job to persuade you. It is not my job to yell at you. It is not my job to hold your hand through this because I don't really feel bad for you. Like I don't have that level of empathy in my heart right now for you. But if you want to sit here and get grace and empathy, then you have to also give me that space as well, and you need to respectfully listen to me as well. Um, and so, that's just one example I thought about recently because it's like we are not going to agree that we are just never going to be on the same page about this. But while also remembering that like it's my mom's brother, like we are related, we look alike, like we are just having very different experiences in this go around of the sun of our existencing, and reminding him that like you have a daughter, you have a son who may be queer, you have a wife, like all these different things of like you were allowed and you did what you did, but now I'm going to hold you accountable in the same way that if it would have gone the way that I wanted the election to go, I would have let him hold me accountable because he would have felt whatever he felt from those results, right? And so I think it is that reciprocal respect, but also for me, I have every right to feel how I feel. And I told him, like, and you cannot minimize that. You cannot tell me I'm overreacting. You cannot erase the fact that I feel this way. You do not get to tell me that it is like all these different things. Like you don't get to tell me how to feel, but I will gladly tell you how you doing this made me feel because now I feel unsafe. And he never responded to the text, which is fine because it was a very long text and I own that wholeheartedly. Um, but I think it was just for also, modeling for my older family members who, my aunts and uncles in this group chat are in their 50s and their 60s. And I think for so long, specifically as Black women, we have been told to just smile and nod and like avoid confrontation. And I'm like, no, I look for it. Like I'm going to go into the lion's den because I don't want the next generation to feel like they have to be silent. I don't want my generation to feel like they have to be silent. I go, what we have worked too hard. I've paid for too much therapy to be like silenced now. Um, and so I just think about that too. And I mentioned this on the last panel of like, you are effective in your immediate communities. And as long as it is, I would say safe and brave or whatever feels right for you to do that. but also to remember that you are a powerful and impactful person, and don't let anyone ever minimize that for you. Because I think there's just so many ways that people try to like minimize or silence or downplay how fantastical we all are because we are paying attention and we are involved and connected. Um, and I just think that is just something we need to name.
100% agreed. The last little joint discussion here before we take some audience questions. Or actually, no, sorry, I have two questions. I can't read. uh, second to last question. Can you share an example where narrative framing helped bridge a cultural or ideological divide? That is a really hard word to say on a Sunday. And I will toss it to Dean first.
Tanya, unmute. Do you want to go first? No, no, don't let me, don't do it. Oh God. Um, I think that's a really good question, and one that my brain is like, how do I even answer that? Where do I start? And I think I'm gonna start first with kind of my workspace, because our social justice center is kind of a hub on campus. Thank God, it's only been open for 2 years, and it's a really great achievement, and I love working there. And we also have fridges and freezers on campus and snacks, and we're one of the very few places that have those things on our campus. And so a lot of people come into our space just to use those, which is great, and I love that because it's not about, oh, you have to be aligned with these ideas to gain access to our super exclusive club where you can like use our conference room. No, it's an open space for students to engage, exist in, whatever it is. And so people study, people take naps, people do this, do that. And I get a lot of people who come in and they're just kind of like, so what's this place about? And already they're kind of setting the stage for how this interaction is going to go, or how they intend for it to go. Their body language, their tone of voice, their everything is standoffish, and they're ready to be like, all right, what's the deal with this whole place? And when I first kind of started working here, I was like, kind of internally, did you read the social justice center? It's a center for social justice. But in interacting with people, and I have some really incredible coworkers, who are fellow student workers who have worked there before I did. And one of my good friends, Achilles, he emulates incredible behavior that I learned from very quickly, which is when people come in and they're like, "Oh, what's this place about?" He's like, "Oh yeah, so this is our social justice center," and then he just goes through the list of all the things that we do, lists some of the clubs that we have. Smile on his face. He's just like, "Yeah, come through anytime, whatever. Just sign in on that little tablet there if you don't mind if you come in. It lets people know that they're using our space, gets us funding, gets me paid, that kind of thing." And it's very hard to continue to interact in an unkind or even just like tense manner when you're greeted with that positive force. And there's a lot of times where people go, huh, and then turn around and walk away. But that's fine. And so in that sense, being mindful about how I interact with other people, what my tone is. I used to be a really like snappy little kid. I would use my voice, this, faces, whatever. And luckily I was trained out of that. But part of knowing that is it's made me more aware of how I'm choosing to interact with other people. Because sometimes I feel a certain way, and then I can interact in an entirely different manner, and I can respond to questions curiously. And I think that curiosity is one of the most useful tools for me when having uncomfortable or difficult conversations in a depolarizing manner. Because just following up with a like, oh, why do you think that? Or does that help you and your family, or whatever kind of the context of a conversation is, asking follow-up questions to learn more about why somebody feels a certain way is really helpful to me and how I choose to go about conversations. Because a lot of the time, the truth of a conversation doesn't necessarily matter to both parties. So while I might have all of this different data and information about why trans people should be able to engage in sports or whatever it is, and be able to show, oh, here's how studies impact, or here's studies on how testosterone or estrogen impact a transgender person's body, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the time, the response I get is like, yeah, but she was a man. She has broad shoulders. That's an advantage. And so it doesn't necessarily matter how or the truth, because they're not necessarily always listening to hear and receive that truth. And so understanding, like, oh, I'm afraid about how my daughter will get hurt in sports, or I'm afraid of what this means for the future of women's sports, kind of getting to the root fears and causes. To me, that's like, aha, this I can talk about, because this is what you're truly focused on, not factual information right now. And there are other times where people are interested in the factual information, but being able to understand and engage with both the emotional and the kind of factual sides of conversations has made things much more effective to me.
Yeah, awesome. Tanya?
I mean, that's great. And this is so lovely to like have this conversation. Like, while you were speaking, I'm going to answer this in a little bit different way, but I, it's just so hard to follow everyone. But I often think of Ted Lasso. Is anybody a fan of that show? For me, having a little, I love pop culture, as you can tell by the shelf behind me. And for me, having a little bit of distance between myself and a pop culture character and looking at how would I emulate this person? How could I be this person? So what struck me about what you said, Dean, was be curious, not judgmental, right? What is under this? Why is this, what can this person teach me? What's going on here? And then I would caution all of us against what I saw a lot in this election on both sides, frankly. And again, we can talk my personal stuff offline, but is totalizing, right? This idea that I want to put someone in this category, and then because they have this opinion, I'm going to assume they have all of these other opinions. And I understand as humans why we do this. It's shorthand, it keeps us safe, all of this stuff. But someone may surprise you, as my students have often done, by sharing opinions and feeling comfortable enough to tell me an opinion I would not have assumed that they had about, say, who they were voting for politically. Knowing all these other things about this person, I went, at first I just was in shock and thinking, I just, this does not fit with my picture I was drawing in my head, my story. So interrupting that and going, all right, why did you come to this conclusion? And are you willing to be open-minded enough to engage in the content? And the answer to that was yes. Would I love to shift their views politically? Yes. But I understood, as Dean was saying, I might not get there. So the best I can do is ask for you to be open-minded and engage in the content and evaluate the information scientifically, which I think is also what you're talking about with having those things ready. So I did a little bit of research, and by research I mean I Googled something in preparation for this panel, and that was that in psychology today, because I'm not a psychologist, but I really like this, and I realized that I do this in a very less structured way, is ask people to entertain, what if this is not true? So we do this in research all the time, and it's called the null hypothesis, right? So if I can find support for this not being true, right? The reality is usually we know how to evaluate information, and we've been taught and trained that way. So we can kind of think about, maybe folks are having too close of an enmeshment with their feelings that they can't really evaluate this information in the way that I can. They can't really have that distance, that separation. So maybe asking them, all right, find me an article that shows allowing a transgender person into this sport in some way negatively affected somebody. My guess is you're not going to find it. But what you will find is articles that show hormones are very incredibly different. People's body size are incredibly different, whatever gender they align with and their identity aligns with. And so if you can have them look that up and come to their own conclusion themselves, I think that's a lot more powerful than if I just tell you how I think about something. Should you believe me? Yes, I'm very smart. I've thought a lot about this, but the reality is you might not. So if I can help you to come to that conclusion, I think that's better. And that makes a different cognitive pathway in your head.
Yeah, love that. Bree?
I just want to sit and listen all day. My great brain is just firing on cylinders. Um, I think having listened to both the answers, I think one of the biggest things I just always want to circle back to is like Tanya was just saying, like people can surprise you. Like if we sit and just think like we judge a book by its cover, we just assume they're not like the worst in people. But I think like we talked about the beginning of depolarization of like if we come from the perspective of like people can surprise us and not everyone wants to be terrible, what does that actually open up for us? What conversations can we have? What things can we lean into? Um, and again, like to bring up the election, like we saw a lot of shifts politically for people too the last couple of years, right? Like we mentioned before, like lifelong learning, like we are constantly changing and constantly evolving. And I think coming from a place of curiosity, we do that at my job, again at a community theater of like whenever we're having an issue at work, like come from a place of curiosity, make no assumptions, right? Like you may, someone a couple weeks ago was like, you seem frustrated. I was like, no, you just weren't listening to me. You can't just label a thing because this is how you want to categorize it. Come from a place, ask me a question. What am I seeing on your face right now? What are the responses? What is going through your head? Um, and I think it just changes so many things of like when you start asking questions and make no assumptions and just think of like you just never know what someone can say and will say. So that's like that's the only thing that's coming up to me is like just to continuously ask questions and be open and to lean into like people can surprise you. And I think it is hard, when we come from a place right now that feels so divided and everyone just assumes that they are right and they just go off their own life experience. But I think, anytime we can kind of model curiosity and vulnerability and just being open, I think it just will change so much for us.
Yeah, for sure. Last question for real this time, before we get to, I think we have two Q&A ones too, so hopefully we can get to both of those. But how can individuals prepare themselves mentally and emotionally to enter those potentially polarizing discussions? And I'll start with Tanya this time.
Awesome. I think, put on all your armor. No, I'm kidding. But also metaphorically a little bit, like think about what is my goal in the conversation and understand that emotions are going to come up and be uncomfortable. And that we talk about the parking lot, and I'm annoyed with this in corporate speak, but put your emotions into a little package and you're going to look at that later. You're going to have time for yourself later to work through those, to process those. Like for me, I think if I know I'm going to have a difficult time, like post-election with students, I'm going to allow equal amount of self-care. When I got the nails done, got the hair done, had COVID, that was not part of the plan. But that's you have to, if you, and it doesn't have to be hair and nails, y'all. It can be like playing a video game. It can be taking a nap. I actually wrote an assignment for the students to do self-care and write about it and reflect on it. So I think having those structures set up, understand where your limits are and like how much grace you will give to someone. I think Bree and Dean have both said this again and again, that there's a certain level at which I will not engage in this conversation because it's hurtful to me and it's hurtful to people I love and care about. And this impacts my ability to be a better teacher, a better person, a better citizen. So here's how far I will go with you. Here's how far I won't go. Knowing that ahead of time, I think radical acceptance, I've mentioned this before, you can look it up. It's a common therapy tool where you accept that this is going to be difficult. You try to maintain that place of curiosity. For me, I sometimes literally have to think about what would Ted Lasso do? What would Xena do? Xena would probably punch it, so maybe not. What would Gabrielle do in this situation? What would my heroes do? How would they interact? And then that allows me enough distance to separate my emotionality from whatever I need to do cognitively to show up for folks. And the last thing I'll leave you with is something I learned about that's really helpful called PAN. Pay attention now. PAN is what I'm saying in my Midwestern nasally COVID voice. And that is stop, interrupt the process. Try not to let your brain make this story and make this totalizing category on someone. Instead, try to see that person. Sometimes I literally have to think about the person as a child. I'm a mother, I'm a parent, and the strategies that work for one kid don't work for the other kid. And you have to stop, step back, and go, okay, what does this person need from me here? They're hitting me. Do they want to hurt me? Not usually, usually they have some sort of emotion they don't know how to deal with. How can I help this person process that emotion? So pay attention now, interrupt what you think is happening and interrupt your train of thought in whatever story your brain's trying to make up about this. And it's give yourself a whole bunch of grace with this.
Yeah, love that. Bree, toss it to you next.
Yeah, I am a big believer. If you've watched Grey's Anatomy from the beginning, I am a big believer in dancing it out. Like I dance at least one song every morning, just like get into my body again after sleeping for at least 8 hours. Um, and then also that like rest is resilience. Like I think so many of us forget to just take time to sit still. And you don't have to earn rest. You can just rest, and it is okay to rest. I think about like in activist circles where I was like, we have to keep going, we have to keep moving, we have to. I'm like, take a nap. The nap ministry exists for a reason. Like we aren't resting enough. Hydrate, talk to a friend, lean into your community. Um, but then too, like Tanya was saying, like, what are your goals? Like, what are your goals around resting? What are your goals around reconnecting with yourself and just holding space for yourself in this moment? I think we are always expected to like be overperforming and over delivering. And I'm like, I'm just gonna turn off my phone and like take a nap for 4 hours. Or I'm gonna like randomly put on Christmas music and like wrap gifts today. Like there's just all these different things like just spending time alone. Um, or like we were just talking about like reflecting on conversations, doodling about it, coloring about it. Like there's just so many ways to get reconnected with ourselves. And specifically like I try to think of ways like away from technology because I just again I think we're constantly inundated. So something tangible as a person who can't draw. It's a thing I'm working on. But like find like I bake, I cook, like I do something that is physical that's going to distract my brain for a little while. So yeah, just finding things that feel good for you. But that also then, help you to find time for yourself again.
Yeah, love an answer. Dean?
Everything that you two are saying doubled and passed back. There's so many parts. First of all, Brie, I love what you're saying about even just like the different methods of journaling. I have always wanted to journal so badly, and then in my like tween teen angst, I tried it, but I couldn't articulate things in the way I wanted them to, or I would get ahead of myself, whatever. And if my therapist was listening to this conversation, he'd probably be cheering and clapping, because I've learned so many different methods of doing things. And yeah, doodle about it, right? Bake about it, nap about it. And it doesn't have to be um, a specific thing that you're envisioning, where it's like, this is how you're supposed to journal, or these are things that self care looks like. You can choose to define those things yourself. And so for me, I think there was a really kind of difficult period for me where I just needed to take time off. I was going and going and going, and I took a semester off, and I wanted to come back as like an academic powerhouse because I didn't feel like I was enjoying learning. I was like, I just want to get back into my head. And for a lot of that semester, I felt like I should have been in class because it felt like I wasn't doing the right thing. I wasn't resting in the right way. And I wasn't making like the progress that I necessarily needed, or I didn't know what that looked like. And then this semester I came back, and I wouldn't say academic powerhouse the way that I was like fantasizing about, but I genuinely enjoyed learning again, which was my key kind of goal, what I wanted to really focus on. And taking that rest was needed, even though sometimes during that rest I was like, this isn't restful, this sucks, and beating myself up about it. Um, and then more to what Tanya was saying, and in kind of preparing yourself for these conversations. And actually, this is something that I heard Brie mention a few times kind of earlier on in the conversation, which is safety. Safety is such a huge thing to me, when having these conversations, or when considering having these conversations, or even just when choosing to engage with another person. You have to evaluate your own safety, their safety, and the safety of others, and choose from those things how you interact. And if you interact, and sometimes the safest thing is to disengage and step away. And sometimes it's to like lessen kind of your own what your goals are. Sometimes those goals need to be reevaluated for the sake of safety. And it can be very difficult early on to decipher what is being uncomfortable and what is being unsafe. Um, and I say err on the side of caution. You can always look back and be like, oh, I was just feeling uncomfortable there, and I could have pushed myself to have a more kind of complex, uncomfortable conversation. But that's not something that you rush into, especially as somebody who is, I am learning this. I may be talking about depolarization and trying to provide like advice or my experience or my opinions, but fundamentally, I am still learning. And hopefully, all of us are still learning. My mom adores the concept of a growth mindset, and so it's something that I've worked really hard to instill in myself. And a growth mindset is just kind of like I can be better, I can do better in all things at any point if I choose to pour energy and effort into that thing. And it takes time to have those conversations. So if you do choose to step into more of a depolarizing mindset, and sometimes that's work you're doing internally. Sometimes you're playing a conversation in your head and going, was that the best way I could have handled this? And sometimes it's actively choosing to start those conversations. But ultimately, it is about your safety. And then beyond that step of safety, then you can begin to evaluate those goals, that kind of thing. And be gentle with yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to slip up. You are going to get angry or sad or upset or frustrated or say something that is not kind of in the mindset of depolarization. And all of that is okay because you're a human being. But maintaining that space for yourself to make mistakes, to do better, to grow, is part of depolarization, and being willing to put in that effort, I think, is a really, really big part of it.
Yeah, great. Well, as we're wrapping up here, the couple of just like short 2 to 3 actionable tips for you guys that I have is just make sure, like we mentioned, ask those open-ended questions and really try to understand other people's perspectives. Use those I statements to express your personal views and try not to assign blame. We've talked about this a little bit in the last one about framing things in a way that is gentle and can kind of guide people in the way that we're trying to get them to without accusing them. And then finding those shared values or common goals as conversation entry points. And just like Dean just said, at the end of the day, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And just make sure that you are taking care of yourself. And when you engage in these conversations, really make sure, like you said, not everybody is worth engaging with. Really, sometimes, unfortunately, we need to take that step back and stay blocked and blessed. So thank you so much, Tanya, Zine, and Bree, for joining me for this. We do have a little bit of a break here coming up for our panel, so we are going to reconvene at 3 p.m. for the panel with Rachel Miner and Kim Rhodes. So please come tune in for that, guys. Looking forward to it later in the day. And thanks, guys, for joining. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening, guys, and we will see you guys at 3 o'clock. Bye, everyone.